What is up, you heathens, demons, you beautiful and blasphemous people? Tonight, we are going to have a very, very serious discussion. So let me go ahead and throw this on. Here we go. We are asking respect in the live chat. Live chat's going to be monitored. I am monitoring the live chat with my computer. So any super chats with questions for the guests, I will turn off my phone as soon as I get done talking, and I will.
Hey, it is not a raging atheist stream if your phone doesn't go off at least once. At least once.
It's not even over here. So yeah. Without further ado, I do have an opening statement. I'll be monitoring the chats. We will definitely be banning or hiding anybody from the channel that's going to come in with disrespect toward this topic or towards any of the guests sharing their stories tonight. Fair warning for tonight, this is a safe zone. So sometimes the conversations that are needed the most are the hardest ones to have. Here in a moment, I will be turning it over to Ali, who is the moderator for this evening. For tonight, the live chat is an ironclad safe zone for our participants, for anyone in the live chat, and for anyone that might be watching in the future. Self-injury is very serious. If you are a parent or friend of someone that comes to you seeking help, I strongly urge you to listen and don't judge. And when they are done talking, ask them what you can do for them specifically. If they need immediate first aid, help them. If they need to see a doctor, take them. If you are a parent or friend, help them in any way you can to get the professional help they need and start a recovery process. And if you are watching and self-injuring, there are links in the description that will give you information and resources. And I ask of you to find someone you can trust. Talk to them. You are not alone, even though it often feels like you are. This is a very serious conversation we're going to have tonight. Self-injury can lead to accidental or intentional suicide. This conversation might be very triggering for some, and I ask that you depart from this conversation before it can do that. Please respect anyone that comes in and shares their story tonight. And with that, I hand it over to Ali.
All right. Thank you, Naka. And thank you so much for the care in which you have chosen to handle this subject, for the safe space that you are choosing to promote. I know that there's been a lot of conflict recently in certain areas regarding the idea of a safe space, but for this discussion, it absolutely needs to be enforced. So, as per usual, if I'm the one who bans you, guess what? You get to stay banned. That said, if any of the mods hides you for mocking the participants or for making fun of mental health issues, or for any religious folks in the audience, if you try to claim that your religion in any way, shape, or form can cure mental illness, guess what? That hiding, that banning, it is irreversible. You are not going to be able to come back into this space again. So please, I ask for the utmost respect for our contributors. Also, a number of folks are going to be sharing some very, very disturbing, very stressful, very painful stories. This is not meant to be any sort of endorsement of self-harm. This is not meant to be looking at self-harm in an overly positive light or encouraging anyone to do it. What we're trying to do is to help destigmatize the fact that this is a legitimate problem that people face, and that mental health as a whole, particularly here in the States, but even worldwide, is something that is not given a great deal of respect and care when it comes to dealing with it, sometimes personally or even with loved ones. So the people that are sharing here in part are trying to help to destigmatize things, to show clearly people that you know and love, people that you may be familiar with in chat rooms, that anyone can be affected by these issues. So with that, our first contributor is Vexed West. Vex, would you like to share some, a story about self-harm or a suicide attempt or something from your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, live chat. Hi, everyone. This is my first time here, and greetings from across the pond, I suppose I should start with. But moving on to the topic at hand, I've battled with suicidal thoughts throughout most of my adult life, and there are days where it's harder, there are days where it's easier, as anyone with any mental health issue will tell you. And self-harm is one of those things that I don't find myself wanting to do, but I definitely have self-destructive behaviors that I notice that I engage in that make it just as difficult to live my life. I have an issue with my weight. I have an issue with the way I conduct myself in my private life, and it reflects in that way in terms of self-harm, because we're not just dealing with suicide, we're also dealing with self-harm. And self-sabotaging yourself like that is definitely one of those things that I think is a lot more nuanced, a lot smaller, and a lot more ignored overall. People being out of sorts, people being unable to function or feel like they're unable to function because of what it is that they're dealing with. And this is very much a prevalent issue that I'm working on. There's a lot of stuff that I want to be able to do better. And just I'm so shaken by the idea that of not having help. Fortunately, I've got a lot of people in my life who are there for me. I've surrounded myself with people who are willing to hear me out the majority of the time, so I'm quite lucky. And being in Britain, we've got the National Health Service, we've got the NHS, where I can get free therapy. I've got support from my work. I've got medication I can take to balance me out. There's all sorts of solutions that I can take to better the situation I find myself in. And I implore anyone struggling with any level of mental health issue, with suicidal thoughts, if you find yourself having destructive behaviors, try and find those resources. Try and find those friends that are not going to push back, who are going to push you forward to be better, to get that help you need.
So, do you have any suggestions for, folks whose loved ones might be in this sort of situation, either over, across the pond or here in the US?
If you have people that you know are struggling with mental health, just check in on them. I would say is probably one of the best things to do. Like, it always puts a smile on my face when I hear from someone and they're just a little bit concerned about me. Just showing a general level of care and humanity to your fellow man can be all that's needed. It's as simple as that sometimes. But if there's something more imminent that you can do, then absolutely. Obviously, there's a time and a place, and of course, circumstances permitting, help them. They need a lift somewhere, give them a lift. If they need a place to stay for the night because they're homeless, God forbid, let them. Try and do what you can to help those who are suffering. Because
So long as it's safe, of course.
the situation's permitting, of course. Like, I'm not saying to anyone, go pick up a hobo, bring him off the street. No, of course not. But those of you who have friends who are struggling with mental illnesses, there are subtle signs. There are little things like, they'll not contact you for several weeks, or they'll, distance themselves because they don't want to be a burden. I'm guilty of doing that too. Like, I don't speak out often enough when I'm feeling down, and it's because I don't want to be a burden on anyone. And that's why there's those numbers that you can call. That's why those numbers exist, for those moments where things are at their darkest.
Yeah, and I wanted to stress one of those points, that sort of checking in and, hey, how are you doing? It's been a while, that sort of thing. Like, I know how much that can make a difference, especially when those sort of dark clouds are closing in on someone, when it's telling them, oh, you're worthless, you're a burden to everyone. Just hearing that one kind voice can make a huge difference. All right, do you have anything more you want to say to the chat before you head out?
I don't know what more I can say beyond everything I have said, and really appreciate everyone being here. Thank you for having me. And here's hoping that this message reaches a fair few people and helps even more.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and for contributing.
My pleasure.
All right, so the next person was supposed to be Via, but she appears to be having some technical issues. So for right now, I think we'll probably move on. I initially had said that Bernie was going to go after Via. So Bernie, if you would like to tell your story. You are muted, Bernie, at the moment.
It helps to unmute.
There we go.
I tend to rumble and go on long, so if you notice that I'm just droning on endlessly, please tilt me and I'll wrap it up. There are two kind of components to what I want to tell. I want to tell my story of what I went through, how I went through it, and where it led me to. And the other part is how I dealt with it. Right? I used to harm myself a lot. Let's start properly. So just a short bio in not too many detail. I was born in Yugoslavia, in a communist country in '82. My parents were divorced when I was 3. My mother married a very, very rich person, and from a very young age, it kind of became very important that we keep up a facade, right? That we keep up appearances, that we look happy, that we look normal, that we look a-okay. So I kind of always had this mental dissonance between what is real, what is really going on, and how things are supposed to look or how things are supposed to be. When I was 9, war broke out, and the country that I grew up in and everything that I was schooled according to suddenly changed from an atheist country to a very Catholic country. I was raised Catholic, but well, anyways, war broke out, and like for the first couple of months or maybe a year, we would basically live in the basement. But you can't keep a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old that long in the basement, so we would go out and play and listening for the sound of sirens and for the grenades, and just kind of had that thing of, when you hear the siren, you immediately go ring somebody's bell, anybody's bell, like the doors, and they let you into their basement until the 3 grenades fall, and then it's all over and you can go back out. When I was 14, the war ended. The world was filled with kind of half-crazed nationalists, fascism, people who were damaged by the war, either by having somebody killed in their family or by having been, like, everybody was a warrior, everybody was a participant in the war, and the whole thing was kind of skewed. Throughout all this, I didn't know it at the time, but I've had ADD, which kind of later on turned into full-flung bipolar disorder, and I was diagnosed some 5 years ago with bipolar. So that's kind. And now I am a 37-year-old man who is married and has 3 kids and works. And a couple of years back, I've had a really bad fallout where my bipolar got completely out of hand. I've had trouble at work. There was some mobbing involved, and I snapped completely. Like, the way I dealt with trouble before that was I would simply change. if there was trouble at school, I would change the school. I would put pressure on my parents and to just put me into another school or another class. If there was trouble at work later on, I would just get another job. And I got really good at interviewing, and I got really good at acquiring new skills. And like I found that change is the easiest way, that basically in some way running away, but in another way, like that was the unique set of skills that I had. I could interview well and immediately start doing the job that I've never done before, and that was great. When my kids were born and when we got a house and when I got married, I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't just quit my job and be jobless for a couple of months until I found the next one. So I just stayed in there and stayed in there for far too long. And it ended with a huge disbalance, bouts of depression, ultimately ending in what I would classify as a suicide. I've decided to kill myself. I have decided that I'm going to kill my family because I don't know how to say this. Like when I was a teen, I would fantasize about killing myself. I would think about what all the other people will be going through after I kill themselves when they see what they have done to me, right?
To clarify, Bernie, the way that you phrased that, you had in the past decided to do that. When you had attempted, correct? You said
Yes.
have.
Yes,
I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding you.
Yes. No, this is not a goodbye letter. I'm describing a previous situation, and it'll be clear in a few minutes. So when I was a kid, I would fantasize about suicide in the sense of what it would do to other people around me, how it would demonstrate to them how much I was hurting. At that time in puberty, I was hurting myself. I would put out cigarettes in my skin or on my tongue or chew them and swallow them. I would put needles through my palms and legs, my thighs. I would cut myself. I would get drugged up and drunk, or in rage, I would bang my fists against the wall, and like all my knuckles are scarred. I've broken metacarpal bones, stuff like that. All of those, from my perspective now, were kind of exhibiting internal pain, exhibiting literal mental, emotional suffering that wasn't visible on the outside. And what I felt compelled to do was make it real, make it palpable, make it showable, right? I can't show anybody how much it hurts here, but if I take, I don't know, a needle or a shiv and run it through my hand, then everybody can see that this is the amount of pain that I can endure, and this isn't, if you know what I mean. And basically, when that last break a couple of years ago came, it was something different. It was no longer, I want to show everybody, I want to demonstrate how much I hurt. It was literally, I don't want to exist anymore. I cannot bear the thought of going to sleep and waking up tomorrow and going through life again and again and again, and then going back to sleep and waking up tomorrow and doing it again. And I've literally, so the thing that was preventing me was that I had a family, that I've had children, that I've had a wife. And when I couldn't bear it anymore, I've decided I'm going to kill them so that they don't have to suffer through my death, and then I'm going to kill myself. The way I kind of resolved that was that I recognized that, okay, if I kill myself and no longer exist, then everything that I aspire to, everything that I think important, everything that I see the world as it needs to be, as it should be, as is right, as is appropriate, as is, that all of that doesn't really apply to me anymore because I am dead, right? So in that case, what I can do, what is available to me, is I can choose to discard all of those things and instead try to bring in as much good into the world as I possibly can, right? If I can no longer be harmed by my ambition of and my expectations of the world to be a better place to me, I can make the world a better place to others as much as I possibly can. I signed up for therapy. I've been on medication for about 2 years. I have been applying that way of thinking since then. And today I'm well. I'm functioning, I'm working, I have adjusted my job and my social circle and my behavior to the world that I live in, being what I am.
It's incredible that you were able to come through all of that.
So some of that was handled in my upbringing, in that keeping up a facade, in pretending that you're well. Some of that was literally learning through self-harm. If you can endure this pain, right, then you learn how to endure pain, and you'll realize that pain is just pain. That you don't need to harm yourself. You don't need to hurt yourself. They don't need to know. One part is what who was talking before me? Sorry.
Vex was the name he goes by.
Yeah, what Vex was. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, he talked a lot about like having support around you and making sure that there were people, having people check in, that sort of thing, how important that is and how important seeking professional help is.
Seeking professional help. So yes, definitely. The psychiatrists and psychologists that I've talked to have helped immensely. The medication is good if you don't use it as a substitute for integrity, if you don't use it as a cure, from my perspective. Some people might disagree. If you use it as a boost, as a crutch until you get well enough that you can walk on your own, right?
Well, it depends, I guess, on the sort of condition. There are some conditions on which, of course, medication is a requirement, and some conditions where, you could potentially use it until you no longer need it. It really depends on the person and their relationship with their professionals, of course.
Some people end up needing it for the rest of their lives. Some people never need it. My psychiatrist gave me a line which was weird to me at the moment. But she told me something like, you can think of it like this. Every person in the world has every imaginable mental disease that you can, like mental illness that you can imagine. All of them. The difference is in how well we can deal with them, how powerful we are against them, how harmful they are in our lives, in our existence, to our functioning. Everybody is depressed. Everybody is depressed. Everybody feels sad. If you feel sad in such a way that you cannot get out of your bed and cannot force yourself to go to the toilet, then you are being dysfunctional to yourself. That's when you need help. If you can do any of those things, you will still be depressed, but you will no longer be clinically depressed, right? And that's kind of the first step that you're trying to get to.
Well, there's
survive.
there's variance as far as clinical depression, but I understand the point that you're trying to make. Basically, you need to determine what dysfunction is within your own life and when you need to seek help.
Pretty much.
So, do you have any recommendations for folks who their loved ones may be dealing with these sorts of issues?
So, I can get to that. I just want to say for the people who are going through this, I've kind of been stumbling in the darkness and trying to find ways to get this one thing done or this another thing done, and kind of controlling my emotion in certain ways. And much later, I found out that the practices that I found that worked for me are cognitive behavioral therapy, and in a peculiar form, which is Stoicism, literally the philosophy of Stoicism. The way of thinking where you accept that what you are doing is only what you are doing, and the consequences are beyond what you are doing. That when you do something, you do the best that you can, and that will give you the best chance for the consequences, but you are not responsible for the consequences. The consequences will happen on their own.
There's a version of that in the psychiatric world. It's radical acceptance is what it's called.
Yeah, and skepticism kind of has these rituals. I've much later found out that it's skepticism, and kind of recognized, oh, look, this ritual is literally what I've been doing here, like memento mori, or which is remember that you're going to die. Think right now that you're going to die today, and what is the first thing that you regret not doing, and go do that thing, right?
I think that some of those Stoic exercises, being familiar with them, might be a bit triggering for some of the folks in the audience, anybody who may still be dealing with these sorts of issues. So we may want to be careful about some of those.
Fair enough. I can only say how it affected me, right? I can only tell my story. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. If you need help, go seek professional help. If you want me to share my story, I can only tell you what I've been through.
I know. I was just saying that there's a couple of other Stoic exercises I'm familiar with along those lines, and I was just stating that some of them might be a bit heavy for the chat tonight. That's all.
Okay, fair enough. For people who are trying to help others, so warmth, kindness, patience, though there is one, like, those things are absolutely wanted and needed and required. And if you can lend an ear and listen, just listen, that's great. If you can sympathize, if you can let somebody share their pain with you and try to feel their pain, that helps a lot. Because if there is somebody there that shares their pain, then that helps, that they don't have to bleed it out, that they can say it and cry it out and speak it out. But there is another thing which is, for me, was a big problem, and I've lost a lot of friends over it, and addiction to pity and addiction to sympathy, where if you are in a place that hurts and you exhibit it outwardly, people come to your aid. Friends will flock, and people that you kind of barely know will flock to help you, and then they will dissipate and go away. And if that cycle repeats, you are kind of reinforced to do it again. And when they don't come again, then you need to do it more, and it escalates, right? You need to do something more extreme to get more people to help you. And don't do that. You will lose friends. People will get tired after a while of constantly helping you and seeing you go deeper and deeper and deeper. Find people that you can
In
trust.
other words, seek professional help before you get so far.
You know what the concept of love bombing is, right?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I'm also concerned about folks that, in the audience that may be concerned with seeking help from loved ones in general. I know that when I was self-harming, and I'll tell my story at the end for those who are unfamiliar with it, that one of my big things was that I hid things completely because I was terrified of the way that people would get sick of me if I did seek help when I needed it. So, there's a balance, I think. And I think that, the insistence on, if you are finding yourself breaking down over and over again, that you're finding that you need that help over and over again, that at that point, you probably do need professional help. You probably do need treatment. There's, whether it's counseling or CBT or medication, there's a bunch of different options, right? But at that point, if you do need help that frequently to the point where it might bother people around you, that means that you're probably at the point where you do need that professional assistance to get your life back in order. Would you say that's fair?
That's fair. Between that point where I should have done what you've just said and the point where I came to a point where I needed to do that was a span of about 15 years. What I wanted to say was, in amongst friends, when you show your feelings, when you show your hurt, when you cut yourself, when you burn yourself, you will get a lot of love. The people that I found later have been my best friends and are to this day my best friends, were people that came up to me and said, "You need to stop this. This is not healthy. You're doing the wrong thing. You're getting all of this love, you're getting all of this pity, but it's pathetic. Don't do that. I'm here for you. I love you. If you want to hug, let's hug. If you want to tell me your story, tell me your story, but don't cry for my pity." If you understand what I mean.
I understand what you mean. Like I said, that's just a thing that you have to be very careful when you talk about, even when you're talking about it in reference to yourself. Do you think that's fair?
Okay.
So, do you have anything else that you would like to say before you head out?
I guess not.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, especially given what you talked about with the war and all of your experiences. It sounds like you've been through an incredible ordeal, and I'm actually quite honored that you decided to share that with us. It means a great deal. So thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your story and for sharing the way that you recovered.
I as I said in PM, I think it is essential that we talk openly and calmly about these things, that we share them with the world, that this is not something that's hidden behind doors or that it gets destigmatized. Both conditions like bipolar and depression and the practices such as, because that's the only way they can be brought out into light and kind of dealt with. If people hide them, if people are ashamed of them, how do you deal with it? Okay, that's it.
Well, thank you again so much for coming, Bernie. Again, we very much appreciate your courage in telling your story.
Bye.
All right. Looks like Naka wants to speak up. You are muted, Naka, so remember that. You were still muted on StreamYard, Naka?
Yeah, I don't usually do that. I just wanted to thank Barney for coming on and sharing his story. And this is such a delicate conversation. And I very much appreciate people sharing their personal stories. I do want to talk about, how people got over it, and express that, if you need to get help, please do so. And if you just need to talk to somebody, please do so. But yeah, I wanted to thank Barney and Vex, because I haven't piped in yet, for sharing their stories and being here tonight.
So just a quick reminder to the chat, we've already had one person who has been banned for proselytization. I want to remind people also, since we have been talking about medication and treatment and such, be very careful how you discuss these things in the chat. We do not want to stigmatize those who may need medication to help treat their problems. If you want to have the conversation about when meds are necessary and not, this is not the time to have it. Those sorts of discussions, when you're dealing with a topic as severe as this, they can wait until a day where we don't have a number of people who have a history of these problems on the show. So please, for the care of everyone involved, wait until, say, tomorrow in the Discord or somewhere else to have discussions about those sorts of topics. It's very easy to tread the line. It's very easy to cross over it for somebody who is sensitive. I want to make sure that all of our guests feel completely comfortable. And for those who may even still be on medication, you don't know if your voice might be the one that convinces them to get off of it, and that may cause a negative spiral in their lives. So I want to be very careful with this discussion tonight, and I'm going to let everyone know the mods are watching for those sorts of things. Please, be respectful. We'll talk about things like medication and such in the debate chats and stuff at some other time. All right. So Via was supposed to be next, but it appears that she's fallen out again. This is a reminder, Knocker, if she's in the back room, to bring her back in. The next person who was going to be after Barney would have been Wolf. Via, have you gotten your speakers in order and such? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Do you have a story of self-harm for yourself or a loved one that you would like to share?
Yeah, definitely. Basically, kind of where I should start my story is where the trauma kind of started that eventually led me to self-harm. I was raised in a very controlling religious group from about 4th grade till 8th grade. And it put a lot of internalized transphobia and homophobia into me. So that kind of basically crippled my self-esteem. And eventually, basically, I've been depressed since I was 9 years old, partially because of that controlled group and partially just because of gender dysphoria, especially. And it started getting progressively worse. And when I was in high school, I came out as trans to my family, and certain parts of my family didn't accept it at all. And they were people I considered myself close to for a really long time before that. And that rejection kind of pushed me over the edge, and I self-harmed for the first time. I was clean for about 15 months after that. Almost no one knew. I never told my parents. I never told any of my friends except for my girlfriend. And even then, I didn't even know her at the time. So I told her way after the fact when I was already going strong and clean for a long time. But I kind of had a relapse around 15 months after the first time I self-harmed. Just kind of everything was overwhelming, and I just felt like that was what I had to do to feel better, which I definitely didn't have to do, and self-harm is never the answer for when you're overwhelmed emotionally. And so I was clean for another over a year since then. And then that brings me up to a few weeks ago. I self-harmed again, and it was worse than usual. And then three weeks ago, I blacked out and self-harmed while I was unconscious. So I went into the hospital for that, and now I'm on some medications that are helping with that. And basically, I've been getting help through this whole time. I've been learning new coping skills. I've been talking to counselors. I've been venting to people that I trust. And it's been quite a struggle, especially with something that has such strong urges that happens for so long. But now I've been clean for 3 weeks. I got out of the hospital 2 weeks ago. I'm on medication that stops the blackouts, the dissociative episodes, so I'm not self-harming unconsciously. And at the same time, I've been staying clean. The meds help with my mood a lot, and they can kind of act as a crutch for me, and I can pretty much do the rest of the coping that I need to do by myself. And I kind of lost my train of thought now. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that there's always hope. I've pulled through this shit, and every single one of you can too. Sometimes it just takes being able to tell someone that you need help. Yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about my experience specifically.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything that you'd like to say to the folks in the audience if they have friends or loved ones who are suffering in a similar way, those that may be still caught in the self-harm cycle who haven't gotten help yet?
Yes, definitely. The most important thing out of everything for if you want to help your someone you care about feel better and stop self-harming, it's to listen. Listen to what they need. Listen to when they talk to you about your feelings. Get them help if they need it. Like if you are in a place where you can get them to see a psychiatrist or a therapist, like definitely do that if they mention that that's what they need. And like even sometimes, like in my case, they'll legitimately say that they need to go to the hospital to keep themselves safe, which was what I had to do. And basically just listen and listen and just do what they need. Like give them the help that they need.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Via. I've heard quite a few of the details of some of these episodes in private before, and I am incredibly proud of you for having the strength to come on here to share your story, for, you know, your efforts to help destigmatize these sorts of problems. Thank you so very much for contributing. Is there anything else that you want to say to the chat before you head out?
I just want to say thank you for having on. It's absolutely a privilege to be able to be on here and share my experiences with you all.
Well, it's definitely a privilege to have you. I know that you've gone through a great deal, and it means a lot to me. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
All right, so the next person on the list actually has ceded their spot to Gaelic Knox. So I will do my best to open up with Emmett. Can you hear me all right? Do you have your mic?
Yeah, I can hear you okay.
Okay. So I know that you've had quite the roller coaster ride with mental health things over the last couple of years. So, would you like to try to start sort of at the beginning of where you decided to seek treatment, since you've asked me to ask you a few leading questions?
So I didn't decide to seek treatment with my mental health stuff until I had failed my first year at university and had to try and explain why, and that was when I sort of came to the realization that I wasn't quite as okay as I thought I was.
We've all had some level of experience with that kind of self-deception.
Yeah.
So where, I guess, would you say that your journey with self-harm started? Like, do you want to share either the first time or what you would consider to be the time that sort of told you that you needed to try to do something to get better?
So I can't really, like, I know when I first started, but I don't have an active memory of it because I have PTSD, and quite often I will go into a dissociative state and I'm not aware of what happens. Like my partner Jeremy would quite often find me in the middle of nowhere with injuries. But I know the first time it happened was before I'd gotten with him when I was about, I want to say 12, I think. Yeah. Like the first time I actively remember was when I was about 12, and that was due to a bullying type situation. That wasn't directly like a cutting type thing. That was I would punch myself to make myself throw up so I wouldn't have to go to school so I could avoid being bullied, and that was sort of how it began. And then just as mental health got worse and other things happened, it kind of trailed into worse things. Yeah.
Well, I know that you, I don't know if you're comfortable with discussing this, so let me know to stop, because you've asked me to ask questions, and I know some of the things that you've shared are personal, but I know that you've had trouble with, like Bernie described his family sort of trying to keep up appearances, and I know that you've had something similar that's gone on with yours.
Yeah, so excluding my mother and my now deceased father, my entire family is very conservatively Christian, and I am very much not straight. So that's not been a helpful thing in this entire situation.
Well, I can understand how difficult that would be.
Yeah. That's actually still an ongoing issue.
Well, I mean, people don't stop being bigoted overnight, generally.
No.
Especially when they feel justified by their faith in doing so. Like, that can be quite the process if it ever changes. So is there a particular instance that you can remember that you would like to talk about, or is there sort of a pattern to the things that you've done that you'd like to discuss, or is there a particular set of circumstances you think sort of led to it that you would like to talk about? What did you come on here to discuss, I suppose?
So generally when pattern type things are concerned, I find, and this may be different from person to person, but I find personally what tends to spark me into that particular kind of state where I will hurt myself is when I get overwhelmed. And that sounds like a very simple thing, but it's where I take on too much and then something goes wrong, if that makes sense. Like, I'll take on something, like I'll take on a bunch of tasks that in theory should be fine, but then something will hit the fan, something will go wrong that is out of my control, and that'll just it's like a juggling act, and then everything will fall and I kind of lose control of everything. And in a way, the self-harm aspect in some weird way is the only sort of source of pain on myself that I do have control over. That
That-
sounds kind of, but yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Like, it's needing to feel that control, and that sort of drives you to end up doing that. There's also a bit of a like a neurochemical part of that too. A lot of research into cutting shows that like minor bits of pain can release dopamine in the brain, and it can be very similar to something like smoking or drug use or things along those lines. Like, it becomes this thing where that immediately is your first thought, and that can be one of the most difficult parts of recovery, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. Because it kind of becomes like a reward thing because in some sort of weird way, it's terrible itself, like it hurts, but in another sense, it does feel good in a sense.
Well, it's a pain you chose rather than one that you didn't. And
Yeah.
again, this is not meant to endorse cutting for anybody in the audience who's still caught in
Oh,
these
goodness,
cycles.
no.
It's simply an explanation of where one can get caught into that mindset, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a number of different techniques that a lot of people use to try to stop themselves. Do you have one in particular that you use, like something like meditation or breathing or, anything along those lines?
So because I'm autistic, I can't tend to just sit and meditate or anything. So I will tend to draw, but I also, and I don't recommend this if you don't have like the facilities, but I do recommend getting some sort of companion animal, potentially something fluffy. Like I have a series of pets because I have the
All of the buns and rat boys.
yes, I for a majority of the stream I've had my rabbit on my lap, but she's decided to heck off. So thanks. But yeah, no, I recommend having like either like someone who has the spoons, and make sure they have the spoons before you like prompt them with your stuff. Either someone who has the spoons or some sort of like companion type animal, or like a soft toy, or like a security blanket. Just something that you can, that like feels nice to the touch, or like is nice to talk to, or makes you feel good about yourself, that isn't going to negatively affect you. I understand that it's kind of like a distraction technique, but I find that if you can distract yourself long enough to not follow through with a self-harm impulse, 9 times out of 10, whatever triggered that impulse can be, at the very least, thought over more rationally and hopefully actually resolved. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, a lot of the time, the urge to cut is or to self-harm in any way, really. There are some people who burn themselves. There are some people who do other things. It's a momentary impulse, and it's triggered by an event or a feeling. And if you can, most of the coping techniques are ultimately, to a certain degree, distraction techniques. If you can get through it long enough, then you can make the choice to versus being spurred to. And it also has the benefit of helping to decouple that particular neuron pathway just a little bit, so that urge gets a little weaker the next time you have it, and a little weaker. That's how in my experience, it hasn't fully gone away for me, but some people tell me that it has for them after enough treatment. But at the very least, eventually you can start to recognize it as being a thing that's wrong or an abnormal thing, rather than, just your immediate response. This is what I do. Do you find that that's been your experience? I know you said that you're still going through treatment.
Yeah, definitely. It's starting to. It's quite literally just retraining your brain, because you've gone through, like, if you've got a history of self-harm in particular, you've gone through that association type thing so much that it is just an automatic. It becomes a reflex almost. Like, something bad happens, your brain automatically dips to there. And it's about trying to retrain your brain to not automatically do that.
Yeah, one of the most powerful things that my psychiatrist told me, and she said this, funnily enough, I had stopped cutting by then, but she said this in relation to my eating disorder. And this was, whether you hurt yourself or not. In my case, it was whether you starve yourself or not. And I know that you've experienced some similar things. You and I have talked about your experiences. I don't know if you want to talk about that particular piece. But
I'm more than open about that.
So, but what she told me is whether you work out until you pass out or not, whether you starve yourself or not, that thing is still going to be waiting for you on the other side. You know, nothing is going to change about the situation, whether you do these things or not. And like thinking about it that way, if you're in the right mindset, can also be quite helpful. Like, you know, if I do this, it's just adding another complication on top of what's going on.
Yeah, like I was actually talking to another friend about like the distraction thing and about how it doesn't actually make the issue go away. And the way that we sort of ended up coming to the conclusion about it is you're not distracting yourself to make the issue go away. You're distracting yourself enough that you can sit back and objectively or subjectively? I get them mixed up all the time. I think it's objectively, like look at the issue and why this is happening and try and find well, not a solution, but like kind of a solution to why, and try and find a better way to deal with whatever has caused that. Like the distraction isn't quote unquote the cure or the solution. It's just a method of redirecting that specific impulse until you can actually go, okay, now how do I fix this? How do I work around this?
Or even, you know, is this something that's actually in my control?
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes feeling helpless can be itself a trigger, you know, like if there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, like, is this something I can handle by myself? Do I need to go to someone? Do I need to go seek professional help? Etc., which I do recommend trying to seek professional help. Even if it's just like, even if it's only a couple of sessions, like, at the very least, get in there.
So do you have any other aspects of your experience you'd like to share? Do you want to talk about the particular forms of self-harm, like with the eating disorder stuff? Would you like to share some of that?
Yeah, so I've discovered that my self-harm in particular will equate into starving and then binging and immediately purging, punching myself, pinching, just generally not taking care of myself, or overworking. Like Aliakai mentioned just before, like the working out until you sort of collapse. I'll do the same, but with working, like drawing and commission work and bits. And while some of the things, like the working itself, can be seen as productive and quote unquote good, not when taken to that sort of extreme.
If you're using it specifically to avoid the problems in your life and it becomes excessive, if you're working until you're so exhausted you can't function anymore, like that's when, you know, you might want to see a red flag a bit.
Yeah. Like an example, I'm technically at this very moment supposed to be at university, but I've had to contact my university lecturer and actually request a week off because I was overworking myself as a form of coping. And I've had to sit there and go, no, I know that not working is going to make me feel like ass, if I'm being completely honest, but you also need to recognize when you do need to step back and go, hold on, this particular thing is a form of self-harm. What I'm doing to this extreme is a form of me hurting myself, and I need to step back and take a breath and just let myself recover and let myself not hurt myself.
Well, and that is very important, I think, for, you know, anybody in the audience, because we have a couple of people who have spoken up that are still dealing with these issues also. You know, if you notice yourself turning to these sorts of unhealthy behaviors, if you notice yourself stacking on more than you can chew, that sort of thing, like, as conscious as you possibly can be, like, try to see those things clearly. If you're over coping with, say, overwork, if you're harming yourself in those ways, that is just as much self-harm as something like cutting or burning or, you know, any of the other things that we've discussed tonight. So, like, that sort of mindfulness can do a lot, because workaholism is itself its own form of punishment. It's just as destructive. We can justify it to ourselves a lot better in the same way that, you know, say with my bulimia, I can justify exercising for hours. Well, exercise is good. Well, not if you do it for 4 hours. It's not, you know. So is there anything else that you would like to share, Emmett, or would you like me to transition you to sort of the last question regarding how to help those who may be suffering in you know, the lives of those around us?
I reckon transitioning like right here would be like a good point.
All right. Well, is there anything that any tips or suggestions you'd like to give our watchers and listeners for if they've got a loved one or themselves are suffering through these sorts of things? Like how can they help somebody else?
So particularly in regards to like helping a loved one if they're going through something like this, instead of focusing strictly on the self-harm aspect, try to more focus on the cause. Because I know a lot of people that will get really upset and really almost aggressive with someone who has self-harm or who is self-harming, and focus solely on that. And that, like, okay, good, you've stopped them from doing it now, but you haven't actually tackled the root of the problem. You've essentially put like a teeny tiny band-aid on like a massive like scar. Like, it's not gonna do anything. It's just cover. It's like sticking duct tape over a hole in the wall. It's not gonna do anything. Like, yeah, it's kind of vaguely solved the issue now, but it's not gonna help in the long run. And just like checking up on them, making sure that they're not pushing themselves as a form of self-harm, like making sure that they're taking care of themselves, making sure they're actually able to take care of themselves, and just making sure that they're not isolating themselves either. Like, I know some people do need that sort of form of isolation, but making sure that they're not doing it as a way of being like punishing. Like, if they need their own little space, that's cool, but just make sure they're okay. Your friends are essentially plants with anxiety. Make sure they're okay and drinking enough water.
Yeah, and that's I want to stress that, like, you know, I know that it can be shocking if you hear that somebody that you love is hurting themselves, but if you find that out, if you overreact, that person may no longer feel safe coming to you if they do it again. So trying to be, you know, while still letting them know, hey, that's probably not the best thing to be doing, you know, try to be patient, try to get them to talk a little bit more if they're comfortable with you, if they're someone, you know, if you were someone that they trust, about the reasons behind why, about what it was that was stressing them out, about what made them feel the way that they felt. Because, you know, it can be overwhelming to hear somebody freak out. Like, a lot of people, that's the thing they're scared the most of. So would you agree with me there, Emmett?
Definitely, yeah. And also sometimes if you do focus solely on the self-harm aspect and not on the origin of why they're doing it, it can become, in some weird way, because our brains work in odd ways, it can become like a reward thing. Like, someone's paying attention, someone's caring, you know, someone's, you know, focusing on this. This is, and I'm not saying that's the way it is with all cases at all, do not get me wrong. But I know personally it has been like that sometimes, that because people have focused more on, because people have actually paid attention when I've spiraled and done something like that, a part of my brain's gone, oh, they're actually listening now. They're actually okay. So instead of focusing on the harm aspect itself, please try and, if you can, focus on the origin of why. What has pushed them to this point? What has gotten them to this state? Because you're going to do a lot more good for your loved one by helping them with the like origin rather than the result.
Mm-hmm.
That's the word, I think. Yeah.
Do you have any other suggestions, or?
My brain's kind of drawing a blank. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's no problem. Like, it's a huge amount of effort to talk about these sorts of things. Like, as I've said to every contributor, I know you personally pretty well, and I know how incredibly Herculean it must be to be here talking about this. I know that you've been open about some of these things in the past, but, like, especially with an ongoing issue you're still receiving treatment for, like, it means a great deal to me that you decided to show up, that you were sharing your story with the chat, that you were, trying to help others that are going through this. Like, it is incredible, and it's quite the show of strength. So thank you so much, Emmett, for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Also, is it okay? If it's okay, can I put my Discord, like my personal, like, account, in the chat in case anyone in there needs to talk to someone who has gone through it?
Absolutely, if you'd like to.
Yeah. Just because I've seen that there's a couple people in there that are currently, I don't know if I'm putting it the right way, that's the way the chat is, that are going through it. And yeah, I feel like having a one-on-one conversation may be advantageous.
Yeah, like, that can be incredibly helpful. If you would like to post your Discord in the chat, you are welcome to. Thank you yet again for coming on, for sharing your story, Emmett. Like, it means a lot, and I'm incredibly grateful to have had you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so there's a number of there's somebody else in the chat, Noka, who is asking. Jared Whitaker asked if they could come on and share. So, Jared, if you could DM either Noka or I or both, and let us know, like, sort of what you'd like to talk about, that would be, you were definitely welcome if you want to share a story. The next person on the list is actually Wolf. He's been waiting for quite a bit of time. So, Wolf, you said to me when you DM'd me that you had a unique perspective on this. So I'm curious, do you have a particular story you would like to share?
Hey, so Wolf the Red here. I've probably got one of the easier roles in life than a few of the people who've gone before me. I'm a straight white male. I have a beautiful family. I have a well-paying job, and if any of you have dealt with me in any kind of personal setting, I love to joke around. I'm always a ridiculous person. I try to make people laugh. I try to lighten the mood because, Lord knows, on Discord, things get pretty heavy pretty often, and I try to come in and, diffuse the tension, as it were. But I've dealt with my own hardships and my own rough times. I think over the weekend, a couple of you may have picked up on one of my more rough days, and I actually decided to reach out and say something to a few people just to kind of get it off my chest a little bit. I compartmentalize my feelings. I'm really good at it. Like, I'm really good at just taking the stuff, putting it in a little box, and not burying it, but just kind of moving it to the side a little bit, and we'll get to it in a minute. And it's worked out pretty well so far. But I've had a handful. I've self-harm, but I don't really want to do a deep dive on that because it's not that I'm ashamed to talk about it or anything weird like that. But I feel like other people's stories are, to me personally, I feel like other people's stories are more important than mine. I had a friend in the Air Force. He brilliant dude, very smart, kind, funny. He was dealing with a lot of pressure from his family, and he ended up killing himself in his bed, like the day before his shift was supposed to start. And
That must have been incredibly difficult to deal with.
It was extremely difficult. He was part of the glue that kind of kept our friends group together at the time, and He was a mentor to me. He was an inspiration. I looked up to him, and it really, really sucked to lose him. Think about him all the time. There's really not a day that goes by that I don't think about him. I picked up a lot of my catchphrases from him. He was an awesome dude. And I guess the main part of the reason I came on here was to talk about the stigma of being able to reach out to anyone, and especially the stigma that goes against reaching out to professionals, trying to seek out professional help. If you start talking about, I want to speak to a therapist, it is like immediately the room gets quiet, no matter who's in the room. It's almost like you have to be ashamed to speak about talking to a professional.
I've heard that it's particularly bad in the armed forces. Like my stepfather said that he learned a lot of that's, his attitude towards those sorts of things, like from that.
Oh, it's real rough, because when they do reach out to like their commanding officer and they get that stuff, set up, it's a therapist in the military. And I'm not saying that military therapists aren't, good at what they do or anything like that. But I've heard stories about how they brush really difficult topics off, or they don't take them as seriously as they should. And their main goal is to get that soldier back in their position to do their job, no matter what it is. Even if it's flying drones and stuff like that, doing things that would give you PTSD, even if you're not in a wartime setting or over there in the sand, doing work over there. Because my buddy, he worked in Las Vegas, but he was flying drones overseas and he couldn't handle it. And that, with the pressure of his family, he decided it was not worth it to stick around. And that's really hard to process for a lot of people. It's hard for a lot of people to deal with that phenomenon of,
Decided it was not worth
hey, Jared, you need to mute your mic, buddy.
Jared, please mute.
But yeah, it's really the stigma of therapists make you weak. Like, if you're not strong enough, and sometimes we even enforce that in our speech. How many times have we told our friends, you're strong, you can deal with this? But then that goes down the line of thinking, if they're in that negative mindset, and I've seen it before, people go, oh, well, then I guess I'm weak then, because I feel like I can't deal with this. And so we have to find ways to help people understand that it has nothing to do with strength or weakness. It's just your brain is not receiving, and it's what it all comes down to, is chemicals. Your brain isn't receiving the chemicals that it needs to be able to process the information that it's receiving. And that's all it comes down to. And that's the same stigma that comes with taking medicine. Like, oh, I'm weak if I have to take medicine, or I'm not a complete person, or I'm just reliant on this medication, or I'm not the
Or
real
it's a
me.
crutch.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not the real me if I don't carry this crutch with me 24/7. And so the way I always try to break that down to people is there are chemicals in your brain that line up. I'm going to just call them chemical A, B, D, and C. My brain produces chemicals A, B, D, and C without little to no problem. I have no problem maintaining a homeostasis state for my mind. I don't spiral out of control like I know other people say that they experience. I don't have severe depression that keeps me from going to bed, or keeps me from going to work, or keeps me from dealing with my family. I don't get panic attacks. I don't have anxiety. Yeah, I get stressed out about stuff, but I feel like that's pretty normal, especially in today's society. Stress is just like a constant thing we all deal with. But some people, like, even the slightest bit of stress will incapacitate them, and they feel like they're too weak to be in this world. And that's when they start slamming themselves and being so hard on themselves, they spiral down and they can't ever get back out because it's this question and answer that leads them down a hole and they can't ever dig themselves back out. And so when I tell people, the only reason you feel that way is because your brain's not producing chemical C, and it's a very essential chemical. And so if a therapist, if a professional decides what is best for you is to take this medicine that contains chemical C, you'll be able to reach that homeostasis again. And I'm specifically talking about situations that deal with medicine being the thing that would fix it. I'm specifically talking about the stigma against taking medicine to right that chemical imbalance that your brain deals with.
Well, and there's a particular phrasing that I've used before that tends to make sense to a lot of people, if you don't mind me adding, Wolf.
Oh, absolutely. Please do.
So you wouldn't tell your diabetic friend to stop using their insulin that they need to survive. You wouldn't tell, your friend with hemochromatosis not to go get their blood pulled out. You wouldn't expect your liver to just magically fix itself. Your brain is an organ like anything else. This idea that we can, grab ourselves by our bootstraps. I mean, that phrase is so badly misused. You grab yourself by your bootstraps, you're going to pull your feet out from under you. That was the whole point of the original phrase, and it's been corrupted. A failing organ is not going to magically right itself. And if your brain is the thing that's failing, just because that's where the seed of your consciousness is, doesn't necessarily mean that you can power your way through it.
And it doesn't have anything to do with you. Like, you can't will your brain to fix itself. Now you can find like psychological tricks to deal with this or that, which I wrote out this whole thing and I ended up just skipping all of it. I don't feel like going deep into it. I don't feel like it's important enough to dive into, but like when I was a kid, my ADHD was so bad I couldn't function. And it took me into my teens to be able to figure out how to mentally deal with my own ADHD. And now you can almost not tell. I still get excited about things sometimes, and you may notice that. But I ended up being able to go off of my ADHD medication when I was in like middle school and high school. But when it comes to stuff like depression medication, your brain needs chemicals. We are all just chemical reactions. And if we don't have the stuff we need, those connections and those reactions can't take place like they are supposed to, or like they do in everyone else. And that's how people start spiraling downwards so badly as they look at other people and compare themselves. And that's another burden of society is placed on us, is everybody needs to be just like this. Well, the reason most people look a certain way or feel a certain way is because their chemicals are responding in a certain way and your brain's chemicals are responding in another way. That has nothing to do with you as a person. It's nothing that you did. You can't blame yourself for it. But what you can do is seek professional help, talk to a professional, and see what you can do to get the help that you need. And maybe you might need to see more than one professional. And
sometimes your first doctor isn't a good fit.
Exactly.
Sometimes your first psychiatrist or counselor is not a good fit. Like growing up, I had a bunch of really shitty Christian counselors, but the ones that I have now are both fantastic, but it took time to find them.
Yep. I don't want to take up a whole bunch of time. I know that the queues got some stuff in there, and since I decided to table a lot of the other stuff that I was going to talk about, the main thing that I wanted to talk about was don't beat yourself up. You can't blame yourself for the way your brain is reacting. It is a physical thing that you can't reach. You cannot get in there and manually fix it yourself, no matter how hard you try. And so then you have to go speak to a professional. Do not self-medicate. Do not self-diagnose. those things will hurt you in the long run. Go seek a professional. Go seek more than one professional if you need to. If you feel like you're not being taken care of in the proper way by the first professional. But make sure you talk to somebody who is educated in the subject and get the help that you need.
And even while you're undergoing treatment, make sure that if something isn't working for you, that you communicate that adequately too. If your first medication, if you're on it for 2 or 3 months and things seem like they've gotten worse rather than better, make sure that you talk clearly and that you communicate that as well. A good professional, one that you're working well with, that you do have a good relationship with, they will listen to you. It's not the same as when you were a kid.
Oh, absolutely. And that's another thing I did want to bring up. I assume it personally myself, but a lot of people may not know. You have to be honest. You have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be honest with the person that you're communicating with. If you keep something from them, that might be the key thing that they need to know to help you. If you don't let them know that the medicine is making you feel a certain way, or that you feel a certain way, let's say you just go in for your first meeting and you're so scared, and you just tell them that everything's fine and somebody made you come to this and you're just doing this to appease somebody. If you're dishonest about that, then they're never going to be able to help you. And I give that example because I've seen that happen with a friend. We convinced them to go, they went, and then they lied about why they were there. And so they weren't able to receive the help they got. And then they then tell that therapists don't help. Well, of course not, because you weren't honest. You have to be honest. You have to be honest with yourself that there's a problem in your life that's making you feel the way that you do, and then you have to be honest with the person that you're trying to receive help from, or else they won't be able to help you. And the best way for everybody to help each other is for everybody to have as much information as possible.
Well, and on the subject of self-diagnosis, sometimes what you initially think is the problem, in fact, more often than not, what you initially think is the problem when you go in to talk to a particularly psychiatrist, because psychiatrists and psychologists, they do the diagnosing, whereas a therapist is more there to help you once you know your issues.
Right. Suss out the situation.
Yeah, make sure that you answer them honestly and that you don't try to steer them toward whatever diagnosis you think it is. Like, sorry, I had to cough. It was interesting. Like, people thought that it was just my PTSD and my anxiety when I went in when I was 24, but my psychiatrist, our first appointment was an hour. She was the one who sussed out that I actually was suffering from ADHD. And that, diagnosis and the medication that came afterwards completely changed the way that my life was run. So you may find that what you initially think is the problem or what you've been diagnosed with prior, it might actually be something different. And making sure you communicate everything that might be wrong, that you communicate the things that you've struggled with in the past as well, to be fully open, that will give you the best chances of getting the treatment that you need for the problem that you're having. And sometimes that can be a lengthy process. They had to actually eliminate anxiety and depression before they found my ADHD. So
Right.
sometimes that's part of the process as well, is getting through the things that are not the answer.
I agree 100%. I really don't have much else to say other than what I've said, so I'm going to go ahead and dip out and let the next person in line have their say.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing, Wolf, and, especially talking about someone that you lost. That must have been very painful.
He's not the only one, but he's one that impacted me the absolute hardest.
Well, thank you again. I know that you're one of the strong people. I know that saying that, puts a lot of pressure on anyone, but
It's okay.
Having that strength to be vulnerable, it means a lot. So thank you so much for joining us and for, volunteering the way that you did and everything else. If we're going to have an after show tonight, do you think you'll be joining us?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to be there. I hope nobody takes this the wrong way, but I love this subject. I love talking about this kind of stuff, and I love talking with other people about all of the things that make us human. And part of the stuff that makes us human are the flaws that flaws is such a bad word there, but the hiccups that make us individuals.
And it feels good to help people too, I'm sure.
I mean, yeah.
Oh,
Not gonna
fine.
lie.
Oh,
I like
fine.
helping people. Sue me. But yeah, I'm gonna dip out, and I'll see you guys soon. I'll keep watching. Okay.
All right. Have a good one, Wolf.
Yep.
All right. So the next person who was on the list was Gainer. Gainer, can you hear me? Is your mic working?
I hope so. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. So you requested to come on a little bit later, I think, in the chat. So I'm curious, do you have a story about yourself or a loved one that you would like to share?
Yeah, this is largely about myself. Just a couple of things to start on. I am autistic. Specifically Asperger's. I was diagnosed at a pretty early age, and went through multiple therapists in order to I don't want to say speed because that's terrible phrasing, but just to get me to a spot where I was better able to be with my fellow classmates. This kind of led me into a very toxic thought process. And it kind of reached a point when I was in college where I essentially convinced myself that I was normal, that there was nothing wrong with me anymore, that I was essentially cured, which, as everyone knows, is definitely not the case. I can mask so fairly well, but there are times when certain personality traits come out more, especially at times of extreme stress.
Well, it's a reminder that asymptomatic is not the same as cured, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. And that when I was in college and ultimately my depression flared up for the first time, it was kind of a rough wake-up call. A lot of the symptoms that I since no longer a problem came back. The depression was so bad that I had to skip classes. And after I was asked not to come back because I had failed so many classes, I just stayed in bed all day. I could not move. It felt like a failure. It felt like I had failed my family. I had wasted their money, et cetera, et cetera.
That kind of shame can be incredibly difficult to carry.
Mm-hmm. And it's shame that I continue to carry today. It's shame that kind of still drives depression that I have today.
Gainer, you cut out, love. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, sorry, no. My internet connection is garbage, so it's very much shame that I continue to carry today and is one of the big driving forces for my depression. And it will kind of manifest at times with a lot of self-loathing, a lot of beating myself up on the inside. And whether these voices are my own or in the worst case scenario where it will be a loved one kind of telling myself, you garbage, you're dog shit, not deserving of love, compassion, anything. And I would imagine some people in the audience would be able to relate to that a little bit.
Oh, certainly. I think that we have a very shame-based cultural messaging system, right? Like, we don't get told when you're a kid, right? You're not told you did a bad thing. Most of us are told you are bad. And we carry that into adulthood where, you know, if we don't perform to this incredibly high standard we've set for ourselves, we then decide to attack ourselves like our nature rather than recognizing the struggles that we're facing. We can be very unfair to ourselves.
Oh, yes. And not only that, we can beat ourselves up for the things that we like or dislike. I may be male, but I'm not necessarily the stereotypical like 6 foot, watches football every Sunday and drives a big truck kind of person. I'm skinny, like anime, and do art for a living. And there's some shame in that's cultural.
Yeah, society doesn't treat artists very kindly, which is quite a shame because there's a lot of what society takes for granted that basically is the responsibility of artists. I'm a writer myself, as many people know, and like the starving artist, it's a stereotype because society doesn't like to value art at the level that it belongs,
Yeah.
Did you suffer from any of that stigma? I'm assuming that's part of the shame, was what you were saying.
Yeah, that's part of the shame. And it's actually one of the big reasons that I had played with the idea of suicide not too long ago, about 2 years ago. I had felt so down, so miserable with myself that I was in a job that I felt I could not get out of. And even though it was a job doing art, I felt so miserable in it, and I couldn't really necessarily make ends meet, that driving my car off of a bridge sounded like a really good idea.
What helped you get through that?
Honestly, talking with my friends helped with that a lot. I experienced an episode years prior when I was working another job, specifically at a restaurant, where my depression manifested to the point I would burn myself just to feel again, just to make it through the day. And that was in addition to taking up smoking in order to kind of relieve some of the stress. They knew about this and they were constantly checking up on me and seeing like, "Hey, Gainer, how you doing? Like, is everything going okay at work? I know you experienced some troubles last weekend. Do you want to talk about them?" And after a while, just something clicked, and that my job at that point was the source, or was a big part of the reason why I had these thoughts. And I was in a situation right then and there where I could quit and be all right for a little while. As well as I had talked to my therapist, got back on a regular schedule, and changed around my medication a little bit. Go ahead, Alika.
Oh, I was just going to say, so have you, since then, have you reached out to your friends when you've had thoughts of suicide? And would you say that your friends have been supportive?
They have. Thankfully, have not had those thoughts as of late. My mental health has been going downhill quite rapidly because of the job that I'm at right now. But we have a system where every single weekend we're trying to support each other. We'll ask like, "Hey, you're free this weekend? Do you want to just go up to the lake or something, go for a swim, or play video games, or watch anime, or whatever?" You don't have to talk about what's going on at work if you don't want to. If it's too painful, don't do it. Let's just kind of distract ourselves for the time being and enjoy life. Kind of cheer ourselves up.
Yeah, I mean, that can be a huge boon as well. Like, spending time with friends when you're feeling that way. I wanted to, sort of bring up the point that if a friend comes to you for, and says that they're having suicidal thoughts of things, some people's first impulse is to label them an attention seeker or to dismiss them. Would you say that the risks of them being serious outweigh any sort of like gratification you could get from that sort of attitude, if you understand what I mean?
No, I think just with my own experience, I try to take this very seriously when someone plays with the idea of suicide. I kind of have a sort of understanding that it could go downhill very quickly. That one day your friend might be reaching out to you, and 1 or 2 days later they might not be here with us anymore.
Yeah. At the end, when I share my story, one of my best friends, I lost her the one time she decided that she didn't want to answer that question. So that this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Just for emphasis for anyone in the chat, this idea that if somebody comes to you and they say they want to kill themselves, that it's automatically manipulative, or that they're just trying to get attention or something like that, that somebody who really wanted to kill themselves would just go do it. I can tell you that that's not necessarily true. In fact, I can tell you from personal experience that sometimes if somebody's reaching out, it's that last gasp of, well, maybe somebody does still care, maybe I shouldn't. And if you meet that person with negativity, if you meet them with doubt, if you meet them with cruelty, that's a higher risk than anything that you could possibly have if you end up, if the person really is trying to get attention or something else. You know what I mean? Like, it's something that should be taken very seriously.
No, I agree.
Go on.
Go ahead. Oh, no, and at that point, I would try to, if they're open to the idea of recommendations, I'd like to ask them to seek professional help. Don't keep this bottled up. Try to talk to someone who has a better understanding of the human mind, a better understanding of how to deal with these sorts of situations. This is not out of trying to dismiss your issues or not caring. This is just a way to put you on a track where you can get better faster.
Oh, absolutely. Like, your friends may be able to support you through a particular instance, but in terms of recovery, a professional is going to be much more capable of helping you. They literally went to school for, 6, 8, 10 plus years specifically to help folks that are suffering in the way that you were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, do you have any more? Naka, you have unmuted. We can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Do you have any more recommendations that you would like to give for people whose friends or loved ones may be still caught in that cycle?
Even if they do start seeking professional help, keep in touch with them. Keep in contact with them. The road to recovery is very long, and it has plenty of twists and turns. While I'm on decent medication right now, it still may not be enough. And there were times where the medication that I was on actually made me worse. I had to change
You
the
cut
people
out
who I
again,
saw.
love.
Sorry. I had to change the people that I saw at times. I had to switch up the medication because it wasn't working or it made me worse. So just keep in touch with that friend. Just constantly ask, hey, are you okay? Like, how's treatment going? If you don't want to answer me right now, that's fine. I won't force you to comply with my demands. But I'm here for you in this journey. Like, you don't have to deal with this alone.
And that can mean a great deal.
Another thing that I
friend.
recommend is yes, it can. Another thing that I do is or recommend is try to pick up a hobby. I play Warhammer 40K. I paint the models. It's definitely for me one of the greatest coping mechanisms that I have. you don't necessarily have to find a hobby that's that expensive.
Yeah, there's a saying in the community, right? Drugs are cheaper than miniatures.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's not called plastic crack for nothing. Yeah, if you can find a hobby like that, just to focus your mind on something productive, it's, for me at least, it really helps.
Is there anything else that you would like to say to the chat before we start to wrap things up a bit?
Again, just for people who are still suffering, please hang in there. It may seem hopeless at the time, but trust me, like, so many people in this chat have been super low points, and they've gotten better, or they're on the road to recovery. So, and I'm sure that can happen for you too. So please keep at it, keep trying.
And that is great advice. Picking up even a small hobby as small as stacking rocks or something can really be a major help. A sense of accomplishment. Usually starting up small and then just sort of building your way up through projects is a great way to give you that feeling of self-accomplishment and help bring yourself up.
Yeah, I have a cross stitch that I worked on. I did a certain number of stitches every single time I felt the urge to purge or to cut, and it's about halfway done. But it was like creating an art project or something like that can be also quite empowering because you look at that and you go, look at all the times that I didn't.
Yeah.
Well, Gaynor, as I've said to everybody who has come on, it means a lot to me that you felt comfortable and safe enough to come here and to talk about these things, to talk about these incredibly personal, painful struggles, especially with comorbid diagnoses like that, and the fact that it's still ongoing for you. The fact that you have the strength and desire to come here to help destigmatize these problems, to shine a light and help other people not feel alone, it means a great deal to me and to the people in the chat, I'm sure. And I'm really proud of you and really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you. So thank you so much for sharing, Gaynor.
No, thank you so much for having me, both you and Noka. Like, this is fantastic. So.
Well, again, it wouldn't be possible without those who came to share. So, and you're quite the figure in the community as well. You moderate on a couple of different servers. You are somebody that has chatted with a number of different people in the chats. You are somebody who's very much at the forefront of these discussions. So, thank you so much for being willing to be vulnerable in this way. Like, it means a lot.
Again, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. You're welcome, as always, at the after show if you'd like to come.
Yeah, thank you for coming, Gaynor, and thank you for sharing.
So we have
I'll consider it, but thank you.
We have two more sharers, I believe, tonight. We have
Jared is back in the waiting room, so 3 more sharers, and then me and you. And then I did close it in the chat, so I can at least be part of the after show.
Mm-hmm. So we have Quentin, Jared, and Callan, and then of course Naka and I. So Quentin, you are up next. You contacted us in the chat. Do you have a personal story or a story about a loved one you would like to share?
Yeah, Naka and I. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Naka and I originally talked about me coming on the last time he did a stream like this. Yeah, so basically what all started was when I was young, I was separated from my parents and I was put into the foster care system. And when you grow up in that setting, you tend to start feeling like no one actually can, appreciate you or love you for who you really are. You're more just a problem. And you get sent to different homes. And I was probably 6 years old when I hit my 14th foster family. And I was being raised at the time as a Catholic, and I couldn't really understand why I felt like I didn't belong, or I felt like I didn't want to be alive anymore. And I had remembered one day I asked my adoptive parent, well, wanted to be adoptive parents. I was like, is it bad that I don't want to live anymore? And they said, that's just that. They answered with the Christian statement, that's just Satan trying to get to you, and you just have to pray it away. And I kept seeking out help, but nothing really actually came. And then shortly down the road, when they realized that my depression was getting worse, they got rid of me, and I was put into a basically like a boys' home. Um, and so one of my friends who I actually got to know very well in the boys' home, he and we always talked every day whenever my depression would get worse or his would, and we would try to cheer each other up. And unfortunately, when he was moved out of the boys' home, he took his own life, and I found out, and it spiraled me into a darker setting. And I still go through a lot today because, like everyone has said, depression doesn't cure itself. You have to seek help. And one of the things that, really helps me out is I talk to people on Discord and on Facebook, and, people will check up on me. And, sometimes I get really scared and I won't reply. But it does actually help someone whenever they say, hey man, we care about you, we love you, we want to make sure you're all right. But when I was 16, I remember that my depression got so bad at one point that for 2 weeks I didn't go to school, I wouldn't leave my bed. I barely ate, if I ate at all. And my parents at the time, they thought that it was just a big act because I didn't want to do what they wanted me to. And I finally just had enough with them, and I started writing a letter. And I planned on taking my life that night. And one of my friends came over to come see me, and he found the letter when I was in the restroom. And when I came back, he was just like, what was your plan with this? And he and I talked about it, and he's like, you know what, we're going to try to help you get counseling. And I can definitely say, counseling, if you find the right counselor or you find the right therapist, it really does help, especially when you talk through what's going on in your life. At the time I was dealing with someone very close to me who had passed away, and I was still kind of wondering, am I good enough to be in this family, or am I good enough to, just be around? Because when it's not all the time, but certain kids, when they are in the foster care system, they tend to believe you're not worth being loved. And when I was adopted at the age of 10, that was a huge part of my problem. Was it was hard for me to believe that anybody could actually love me, and I would lash out when someone told me that they loved me. Um, sorry, it's kind of a hard thing to talk about, but
Oh, why would you apologize, love? Like, you're talking about some of the most painful experiences in your life. Like, if your voice cracks, or if you need to take a moment, like, I can't imagine why anybody would be impatient with that.
thank you. But one of the recent things was a few days ago. I found out that my little brother tried taking his own life by walking into oncoming traffic, and it set me into something that I honestly really didn't think I would be able to come out of. Because when you think of your little brother, you don't think that he's only 13. You don't think that oh, my little brother's not going to do that kind of thing. He's happy, he's a little kid. And I kept deluding myself into thinking that I have depression, and it could be in my other parts of my family. And it took a bunch of people, honestly, to keep me from doing what I was thinking on doing. And my first instinct was to go back to taking drugs because I was an addict for a good time, and I was willing to throw away 2 years of sobriety just so that way I wouldn't feel anything. And for the people who are going through similar things that I'm going through, I can genuinely tell you that drugs are never the option. It's just because you feel happiness for a quick minute doesn't mean it's going to help in the long run.
There's been a bunch of research that shows that addiction frequently is tied to self-medicating for mental illness, or trying to abate loneliness. There's been quite a lot. It's the psychological component that's the hardest, finding another coping mechanism when you start to get better.
Yeah, and one of the things that really did help me beat my addiction was at first I was terrified to go to a therapy again, because when I first went, it was a very, very Christian therapist. And one of his, every time I would open up, he would tell me that, maybe you should pray about it, and it'll go away. And a lot of my adopted family, they didn't believe that depression was an actual mental illness. They believe that, everybody has depression, and if you pray about it, it'll go away. So I kept keeping to myself, and even throughout high school, a lot of the people around me really didn't know what was going on with me at the time. I would put on like a happy face and act like everything was okay, because that's how I started to program myself, was like, don't let anybody know what's going on. Just keep going, acting like you're happy. And
were you afraid of being a burden on the people around you? Was that part of the reason why?
Yeah, I was terrified that if I opened up, people wouldn't want to be around me anymore. And
that's a very common fear for people who hide these sorts of things from their friends.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for one of my friends actually, seeing, because if they knew me pretty well, I never really wore sweatshirts or anything like that. And I came in one day and I was paler than I am right now, which it says a lot. Sorry, but and I was extremely sick, and I was wearing a jacket at the time, and my friend asked me what was going on. You don't seem right. And if it wasn't for him really taking notice of what I was doing, I don't think I would have been here today, because I was trying so hard to just kind of fade out. For a while, I stopped talking to my friends. I stopped going to lunch. I stopped trying in my classes. I was failing almost all of my classes. I was in choir, and I was offered a lead role in it, and I turned it down. And it took a good year before I started thinking that, maybe I can get help for this. Maybe there's some sort of hope that can, help me realize that I'm not this worthless person that no one cares about. And I'm grateful for the people who took the time to, reach out to me, and was like, if you ever need someone to talk to, or if you ever need a safe place, you can always come to me. And people may not see how important that is to somebody, and it really can mean, the difference between someone taking their own life or someone actually getting help for it.
Well, and they might not even tell you that you saved their life that day, until far later, right? Just by checking in on someone. A dear friend of mine told me that one day, just checking in on her, she had been considering suicide, and she promised herself, well, if one person gives a fuck about me, if I can prove that one person cares, then I won't. And apparently I had decided to reach out to her that day to ask her if she wanted to game together. And she never told me that day that was what was going on. She put on this happy face, and we did. But, a year or two later, she told me that was what stopped her.
Yeah, and I unfortunately, even though I was going through the same thing, I remember a good friend of mine who went to not only through grade school with me, but was basically like a brother to me. He took his own life over the phone with me. Um, and I didn't, and what really upset what was going on at the time, no one really knew. He wouldn't tell anybody. And I was at work when he called. Um, and he was acting suspicious, and I was like, "Hey man, do you want me to come home? I'm on break right now. I can come see you." And he was just like, "No, no." And I'm like, "All right, well, let me call you back in about 15 minutes." And I kind of brushed it off, um, because I was just like, maybe he's not feeling good, maybe he's just kind of sick. Um, if and I can honestly tell you, if you think something's off about somebody, especially if you know them pretty well, if you think that they're acting differently, or you notice that there's a huge change in the behavior that they're exuding, you should either talk to them or go to someone that you can trust to help get them help, because you never know what's going to happen. And that's kind of how I've been living my life. And if anybody ever actually wants to talk, I'm always open.
So, sorry if you can hear my cat purring. She decided to crawl into my lap. So, a little bit of unprofessionalism for a moment. But do you have any suggestions for folks whose partners or friends may be stuck in this particular cycle still?
Yeah, especially if you're with someone, like, just, you know, even if they seem like they don't want to talk, they may actually want to talk to you. Take a moment, put your phone away, sit with them, and try to talk to them about how their day is going. You know, try to show some interest. Like maybe ask them if, hey, do you want to go play some games with me? Do you want to go out and eat dinner? Um, that's one of, like, it just showing them that you actually genuinely want to be there with them and that you genuinely care is one of the greatest, for especially someone like me. um, and don't give up even if they seem sheltered, because there are people who do build up walls, and it might take you a few weeks, a few months, or even a few years before you break that wall down. You know it's easy to give up, but I think that if you keep pursuing it, you'll see a greater outcome than if you were to just walk away. And I'm thankful for the people who have actually stuck around and broke my wall down, because if it wasn't for them, I don't know what would have happened.
That seems to be a major theme here tonight is, just be kind, listen, be patient, be caring, check in on your friends and loved ones. Like, be willing to believe them if they say they're suffering. Don't just like brush people off.
Yeah, and I do appreciate people who are religious, but offering I would suggest offering more than just religion to help someone, because if it helps you, that's great, and I'm not discounting it at all. I hope no one takes me discounting, people telling others about their religion. But maybe offer, like, hey, do you want to go to the park with me? Or, hey, I'm cooking dinner, do you want to come over? Because they may not everyone may think that they're worthy enough to enter that religion, if that makes sense.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, and I mean,
for
like, go on, Helen.
when it comes to religion, do not use religion as a substitute for mental health counseling. It will usually sometimes backfire, especially as you misinterpret various things. And yeah, always
Well,
seek
even as
professional
some,
help.
go on, sorry.
Even seek professional evidence-based. Religion can be part of your treatment, but it cannot be the whole of your treatment.
And that's only if you already are religious. You know, people who attempt to use somebody else's suffering, like the death of a loved one, or their depression, or their bad habits, to try to convert them to a religious practice, those people are predatory. And, you know, like, they may not even realize it if they think that they're coming from a good place. But be wary of those sorts of things if you are suffering. Do you think that's fair
And
to say?
definitely,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely. You know, when I was going, it wasn't NA, but it was something similar. You know, we opened it up to everyone, you know, even if you were LGBTQ, because I'm pansexual. You know, I had a rough time with my adopted family actually accepting that they actually disowned me for quite some time. But, you know, if you genuinely want help, you know, and you know someone who, and if even if you're going to those kind of meetings, you know, and you know someone who you think could really benefit it, invite them. Don't make them share, because that's the one thing. If you try to make them, it's going to make them not want to come. It's going to make them not want to be there. It's in, you know, it may shy them away from it in the future. But if you genuinely, you know, you offer them, you know, like a safe space to even just talk about, you know, what they're feeling for that day, and they open up, I think that they feel more comfortable, you'll slowly see them start to communicate what they might be going through. You know, it took me a couple of weeks before I was even comfortable explaining why I was there. And you know, when I did, you know, people opened they welcomed me with open arms, and I think that's one of the greatest things someone can do.
Definitely. Like, having a safe community and having a place where you can share, or at least even if it's just one close person, you know, while you're getting treatment and such, or, you know, if you're going to go seek treatment, just having someone you can talk to is absolutely invaluable. Do you have anything more you'd like to say to the chat?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to be in the after show tonight. So if anybody wants to, you know, message me on Discord, or you know, they want to, you know, just talk to me one on one, feel free to. I'm always available.
Well, I want to thank you, especially because we haven't gotten a chance to get to know each other or anything. Thank you so much for your courage in sharing your story, in talking about what sounds like some incredibly difficult times in your life, you know, growing up in and out of the foster system, having to deal with, you know, losing, like nearly losing a loved one, having to have lost a very, very close friend and a support that you relied on. Like, dredging that up must have been, you know, it must be incredibly difficult.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Like, this wouldn't be possible without you guys. Everyone's here, who's willing to open up, who's willing to talk about these things, to shine that sort of light, right? You know, like, every person in the chat that I've seen who's spoken up has said that they found someone here who has spoken, who made them feel less alone. And there's a number of people who aren't even in the chat that are probably watching, or who will watch in the future, and will be able to see these things, and maybe one of them will click one of those links and get the help they need. So thank you again so
Definitely.
much for
Just
coming.
thank you.
All right. So we have two more shares tonight before Naka and myself. Jared, you are the person who is up next. You contacted us in the chat. You are somebody who we've gotten to know a bit in the Discord. Do you have a story about yourself or a loved one that you would like to share?
Yeah. Can you hear me fine?
Yep, I can hear you.
My depression started around like 6th grade, I believe, and it hit me pretty hard. I have clinical depression. I have a chemical imbalance in my brain, and I hated myself. I literally just absolutely hated myself. I wanted to die. I thought I was responsible for all the problems in the world. Um, and one of the ways I didn't want to exist. One of the ways I would deal with it is banging my head up against stuff like a car seat or the wall. And I just felt hopeless, and every day just felt like a dredge. Um, and then I got to high school, and I had some I went to a psychiatrist, and the medications helped some. And I've gotten to college now, and my depression's kind of come back in full force, but a different way, as in it's sapped my energy, my ability to feel interest in things most of the time. And
Sometimes changes in circumstances can, worsen symptoms of existing conditions. Asymptomatic doesn't mean cured,
um and so I've realized myself I have bad coping mechanisms and the way I typically deal with emotions, because I dislike having emotions, and the only emotions I'm typically comfortable displaying are anger. Literally just anger.
That can
So
be a lot of cultural messaging too, right? Like particularly, people assigned male, there's this pressure not to show weakness. And so that can come out as, well, the only thing I'm allowed to be is angry.
also my face is very stiff, so people have trouble telling, so I'm quite easily able to hide it. And I don't like talking to other people about my problems. It makes me feel like I'm just dropping like a pile of shit in their lap. I'm fine if other people talk to me about their problems, but I just can't, like, it is quite hard for me to talk to other people about my problems specifically. And it's gotten so bad to this point, it's like it takes me like an hour or two to get out of bed.
That sounds like it can be quite the struggle.
It is. Everything just feels like a pain. And I have horrible coping mechanisms. My three coping mechanisms for emotions that I've noticed is either I ignore it, I shove it down, or I mull over it, like for a very long time, to the fact that it just ruins my entire day.
So are you currently receiving treatment? Like, do you have a counselor or a psychiatrist that you see?
Yeah, I'm taking medication too. I would be much worse. Like the baseline that I have established is kind of I don't feel much, and that's probably the best I've ever been, because I've never felt like I've been like truly happy overall for a very long time.
So have you found that counseling or things of that nature have helped you in the past? Like, I know that you said that you're still struggling at the moment, but like you said that things were better a little while ago. Like, do you think that it's just the stress of college that is making things so difficult right now?
It might be. I kind of feel like I'm a failure and whatnot. But I had some therapy a while ago, and it worked pretty well, and then I stopped it, and I've kind of regressed afterwards. But what's really helping right now is this whole community and Discord and such, and people talking to me, because I kind of feel invisible usually, and ignored. So it helps when people talk to me.
Well, and I'm so glad that you found like help in the community to feel better. If it's not too forward, it sounds like, looking into counseling again may be very helpful if you're still dealing with struggles with the transition and potentially with your medication and such.
Oh no, I totally need to do that, and I'm looking into it right now.
Well, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for the chat for anybody who may be suffering. It sounds like, as you are at the moment, if they've got friends or loved ones who are dealing with that. Like, what do you think would be the most helpful to you if, for...
The first thing I suggest is find a hobby you're passionate about. Like, I like to play a lot of video games and build models and such. And then go seek help. It's like one of the best things you can do. Honestly, and you need friends. You need to find a support community because I have a tendency to isolate myself.
A lot of people do when they're suffering. It's like a wounded animal that crawls into a corner under the bed, right? You don't want people to see that you're bleeding, but at the same time, like, nobody can help if you don't tell them.
Uh-huh. I think that's about all I had to say. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. Like, especially, in much the same way that I said to Emmett, if you were still going through this while you were still suffering, like, coming forward and opening up in a live stream setting like this must have been terrifying. And I'm so incredibly grateful that you chose to share with us. And I'm glad that you're a part of the community. Like, I really am. I've seen you in live streams on a number of different places that I frequent, and you're always so positive. It's wonderful to have you as a part of our community.
I just like saying hi to people and telling them nice stuff.
Well, for what it's worth, those little things that you've even done for me have meant a lot to me too. So I'm very glad that you're a part of the community, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart for every person that I have said this to. I don't bother blowing sunshine or smoke up to anybody's ass. Like, that's just going to cause rectal problems in the long term. Like, when I say something, it's from the heart, and it does mean a lot to me that you decided to come on and that you're sharing this, and that you, even in your struggles, have decided that you want to help us to destigmatize these sorts of issues, to show that there are people right here in this community, people that we know, who are suffering too. I think that that is so incredibly important, and it's worth a great deal that you did it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Again, without everybody who shared, like, this would not be possible. All right, so we have one share left for the night. Callan, would you like to share your story? I know that yours is a bit different, and that you were concerned about ending on a particularly low note, but Naka and I are both going to speak towards the end, so you won't be the last person who speaks.
Okay. So, yeah, I have never self-harmed myself. I've been suicidal before. And during that time, I called the suicidal helpline, which is something I recommend to anyone who is going through the current crisis. But with all that said, I've lost 2 friends and a partner to suicide. One friend was in high school, the other friend was in middle school. Now, I say suicide, but the difficult part is that, well, for one, my partner who probably committed suicide had type 2 bipolar depression. Depression comes with about a 0.8 chance, 80% chance of attempting suicide, especially if you're not on your proper meds. Unfortunately for him, he could never get on his proper meds no matter how hard we tried because of his insurance company. Add to that the struggle of poverty, and, well, there was nothing I could do. And yeah, so one time he said he was going somewhere. Turns out he was found dead the next day in his house. Unfortunately, I never got a chance to say goodbye or anything because, well, his family is rather not pleasant towards LGBT.
That must have been absolutely terrible for you.
It was a hard time, especially given everything that we had gone through. So, yeah, in short, things, there aren't necessarily happy endings in this world. If you think somebody's having a tough time, stop and check on them, because there is no happy ending here.
I hope that
Things
you don't
do
blame
get that
yourself for
bad.
what happened at all, because that can be the most difficult thing when dealing with these things. Like, that it's not your fault.
That is a long conversation, to be honest. One that isn't really quite suited to on air. But the short answer of it is, yeah, I do blame myself in part. Probably always will. But I look and I try to do better. That's why, if anyone needs to reach out, I'm available. I've helped plenty of people to prevent themselves from committing suicide. Oh, and another thing also is that if you do have someone who does end up jumping over that cliff, it's not necessarily even their fault. There is a phenomena where you can black out and do irreparable damage to yourself. That's why if you have blackouts, seek hospitalization and help, because you could inadvertently end up killing yourself.
That's an incredibly important thing to point out. Like, I think I lost my best friend to suicide when I was 22, and it's something that I haven't fully gotten over. I don't know if anybody does, but one of the things that I had to learn is that, you know, even though I reached out that night and everything else, that there was nothing I could have done absolutely to force her not to do it, if that makes sense. And sometimes if something like that happens,
It was
you
the
know,
blackout's choice, not hers.
yeah, effectively. And that's the thing that I think if anybody in the chat has ever lost a loved one, you know, especially if you talk to them beforehand, you know, if they seemed fine or if something seemed off, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that it happened. And, you know, like, there isn't anything you could have done differently necessarily. Like, you might tell yourself that, and there's a lot of us that do, but that may not be the case. In fact, more often than not, it's not the case. Especially if people do have blackouts or if there's underlying mental illness that wasn't getting treated, you are not a professional. You can't magic that away.
This is why a lot of times, instead of saying someone killed themselves, people will say they died by suicide. Because that way it emphasizes the fact that it wasn't necessarily their choice.
So, do you have any suggestions you'd like to make for the chat if they have a loved one who is suffering in that way?
Get help. Also, if it isn't already, the suicide helpline number should be in chat.
It is actually. There's a article from 17 magazine that has a bunch of different suicide hotlines and self-harm prevention lines from a number of different countries. There's also the self-harm emergency text line right at the top.
All right,
So
and good.
if people
And with
are
all that
uncomfortable,
said, that is my story.
well, given that you're talking about the death of a loved one, particularly someone so close to you, like, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, Callan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. Like, I know that you and I are good friends, I know that you're a friend of the channel, I know that you were someone who has come on many, many times, but something this sensitive, especially given everything that's been going on lately, it's deeply brave and a very, very powerful and moving thing that you have the courage and the strength and, you know, the desire to do something like this.
If I could change things, I would, but it's not something you really get over.
Yeah, and I can imagine how painful it was to bring those memories up.
Destigmatization must be done.
And, you know, again, thank you so very much for sharing, for coming on, for volunteering of your own volition. I know that you felt that it was a very dark way to end, you know, but again, there's Naka and I, and also there's hope in your story as well. There's that hope of reaching the people that are listening, that are watching, that, you know, any one of those people might check in on someone they haven't talked to for a while. Who knows? That decision might save a life. You never know.
Maybe.
Spreading kindness can only ever have positive effects.
That is true.
So, is there anything else you'd like to say to the chat?
Nothing really. Just keep your eyes out, stay strong, and keep fighting. When you go to that cliff, don't jump it, look at it, and try to laugh at it, because it is absurd in the end that you even have to go there.
And if you do find yourself thinking about those things, if you're in the chat and you're suffering through this right now, there is no shame in getting help. None at all.
Exactly. There's never any shame in getting help. We all need a little help. And yeah, we all need a little help to survive this hellscape.
I mean, you know, you don't even have to hit rock bottom to go and to get help. You don't have to be at the point where you can barely get out of bed. Like, there are a number of things that if you're struggling in your life, if you're feeling overwhelmed, there are professionals who can help you. You don't have to let your entire life fall apart before you do. In fact, frequently, if you get that far, it'll take a significantly longer time to get better. The sooner you can recognize that there's a problem, the easier it'll be to go through treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you again, Callan. I understand. I know that you usually have to go to bed within the next couple of hours, but you're welcome at the after show if you'd like to be there. It's going to be heavily moderated.
All right, I'll see if I can be there.
All right, much love, Chicky. Like, you're an amazing friend and a wonderful member of our community.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, it actually comes to me. I don't know how much of this story I should share. Most of my closest friends in the community have heard some part of this, so I'll do my best to tell the parts I think are meaningful. There are still some people left alive in this story who they were never prosecuted for what they did, and there are some people in my family that still think I'm a liar. So I'm going to have to be a bit sparing on the details for that reason. But I was raised in a highly conservative Christian household, which probably sounds strange to a number of you. My memories start when I was between 5 and 6, when my grandparents, on my father's side, the British ones, the ones who raised me and gave me this lovely accent that most of you are not familiar with, because I have to be either very, very relaxed or extremely angry, drunk, or high most of the time, if you're going to hear me talk the way I naturally do. My parents were, when they got me back after my mother was an addict who married her dealer, from what I understand was only about a year, and she didn't really want me, as far as I could tell. She went back and forth between, you were an accident, and you were, you know, a child of God. And most of the time it settled closer to the you were an accident. And so both of my parents were very, very abusive. Her and my stepfather. My father and her split up, like I said, when I was 1. So there was physical abuse, verbal abuse, and some other sorts of abuse that I'm sure you could fill in the blanks that happened, particularly between the ages of 8 and 12. And when I told her about what happened, she pretended to believe me for some time, and then didn't, and I was physically punished for it. And my stepfather came into my room and afterwards, and well, I will say that there's a reason I have as severe PTSD as I do. Well, at one point, I have 2 older sisters, twins, and they tried. One of them tried to get custody of me after my stepfather had a stroke, and it was wonderful while I lived with her. I had never felt so loved before. I had never been so cared for. I had never been in a place so calm. I'd never been in a place where there wasn't yelling every single night, that beatings weren't the first punishment for things. And one day I made an off-kilter joke, and my brother-in-law, who came home, he was a long-range trucker, I believe, at the time. He's gone through a number of different careers. He came home in a foul mood, and they got into a fight, and he decided that between the off-color joke that I made and their financial situation, that they couldn't actually take care of me. And I was told that my mother was going to come get me that night. I locked myself in the bathroom, and this is a trigger warning for anybody who has thoughts of suicide. I'm about to very graphically describe what I attempted to do. I filled the bathtub up with cold water, and I slit both of my wrists down. And I bled until I passed out. And I guess they must have broken the door down or something, because I woke up in the hospital. And my mother told me that I was the puppy dog on the street that nobody would care about, that everyone felt sorry for, but nobody would ever take home, that no one would ever love me. And so what ended up happening was she forced me, because I was so young, I didn't know. I didn't know about the laws, that required her to take care of me unless she surrendered me to the state or something. She sat there and fed me words to say and made me call my entire family and tell them that I had lied about the abuse. A stigma that sticks with me to this day. And these things didn't stop when I turned 18. My parents changed the locks on the doors. I ended up moving in with a lesbian couple who I was good friends with. I went through several abusive relationships and had 2 more suicide attempts. I developed an eating disorder. Even now, when I'm stressed out enough, I'll starve myself sometimes, or exercise until I'm injured. My foot injury is partially due to that. I used to cut when I was younger. Sometimes it was the only way that I could cope, because I wasn't allowed to show my feelings. That would result in things getting worse. I got very, very good at hiding them, actually, which itself is a form of self-harm, as people have pointed out in the chat. And I'd smile and laugh and lie effectively until I was 18, and then go home at night. And I didn't leave scars a lot of the time. I do have quite a few of them from when I got a bit overzealous, but I didn't have access to things like razor blades. I used my stepfather was a chef to start with, and he had highly sharpened kitchen knives, and just the lightest touch, I was looking for the pain, and the pain would give me some form of release. And there was a bit of a fad of that. One of my friends was the ones who showed me that that was a thing that you could do to relieve your pain. And I know now that it doesn't help. Like I said before, if you cut yourself or you don't, like the situation that you were trying to escape from is still there. It just gives you that momentary high, and now you've got a bleeding cut you've got to worry about. So I'm in treatment for my eating disorder now. I've had a significant amount of treatment for my PTSD. The professional that was handling me retired, and I'm looking for another. But I can say that, between the treatment I've received for my PTSD and the treatment that I'm getting for my eating disorder, there is hope on the other side. There's even hope if you're in a terrible abusive situation. There is something on the other side waiting for you. There are resources. It's very, very difficult. Sometimes it's an incredibly hard road to get better. And that stuff that happened to you, it's still going to be there. Like, that doesn't go away, but how much it affects you, how much it changes the way that you view the world, with the right help, you can get some measure of control over that. You can unlearn the shitty things that the abusive folks taught you. You can do better for yourself. You can choose to be better than what they would have allowed you to. And that, I think, is the note of hope in my story, that I've chosen to be honest where my parents were liars. I've chosen to be forward and strong where my parents ran to substances. I've chosen to be the person that I needed as best I can for those who are in my life. And for those reasons, I can confidently say that something like suicide or self-harm, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And it doesn't sound that way when you're thinking about it. It didn't sound that way to me when I slit my wrist open. It didn't sound that way to me a number of years later when I overdosed on muscle relaxers and nearly died on the phone with one of my best friends. It didn't sound that way to my best friend when she did go through with it when I was 22, when I talked to her the night before and she lied to me and told me things were fine. And then they found her suicide note where she detailed that her fiance, she was fundamentalist Christian, she lost her virginity the night before a wedding night, and her fiance had cheated on her. He had left his phone at home, and she saw messages from his mistress, and it drove her to suicide. And there is something on the other side, something that those of us that are still around, that are still going through this, there is hope. And I'm grateful that I didn't succeed either of those times, because I wouldn't be here to tell you guys this story. I wouldn't be here to help moderate. I wouldn't be here to contribute to this amazing community. And neither would any of the other people who were here in the chat tonight. So I urge you, if you're suffering, reach out. Reach out to friends and loved ones. They'll be more understanding than you think quite often, if it's safe to do so. Reach out and find professional help, because there is hope. It might take a long time to get there. It might be a lot of work, but there is. And with that, I'll pass to Noka.
First, I just want to thank everybody that's come on tonight. The bravery and the discussion was what I hoped we would have. I've sat here and I've listened to every word and every story, and I've taken them all in. I'm a bit emotional going into my own, because I'm going to be approaching self-harm in a different way. And I've spoken about it in my atheist story, so it's probably not going to be a surprise to a lot of people in the chat. And I do want to warn the chat that now that I'm speaking and we're going to be wrapping up fairly soon, either NIFBs are on soccer accounts or polite leaders, people are in the chat. So let's just be aware and let's keep the chat where it's been all night. Everybody's been amazing. Ali, you have been amazing. Thank you so much for that story. You shared it with me in confidence, and I am just so proud of everybody's bravery tonight. I got a lot of advice from a lot of people about how to do this tonight, and we thought about it, and we put a lot of energy and effort into shedding light on an issue that it happens just so frequently to so many people. People like if it's never happened to you, you probably know somebody that's going through this. I was a sports star. I've always been a very big human being, very massive. Some people are tall and skinny. That's not me. I've always been very, very massive. And before I grew tall, I was, a chunky boy. And I always played sports, and I was always good at just about every sport that I ever tried to play, except for baseball and ice skating. Those two I just couldn't get the grasp of. I was in high school. What did we call it back then? Like fucking PTA or whatever. Gym. Yeah, it would be gym. It's been a long time since I've been in high school. And we were playing baseball, and I was in the outfield. Somebody hit it, and I'm like, I got it. And no, I didn't have it. It hit me straight in the face. But the sports that I really excelled at, football and basketball, I was pretty good at like lacrosse. I was a superstar. I was really good right up until the 11th grade. I was when I was 15, I shot up to 6'5", or just under 6'5". I'm a very big person. And once I shot up, people started hitting me lower, and they'd hit me in my legs and then my right ankle. And I played basketball, and basketball was actually the sport that I was just really, really good at. So it ended up really weakening me. I had my door open, and it's starting to rain. It really weakened my legs. And you have to understand just like how good I was, the aspirations that I had and my family had. And, you know, my brother was the smart one. And he's brilliant. He was definitely smarter than me. You know, my way to college and my way out was basketball. I've talked about the extreme poverty I came from, and I'm about to get into the story of how my dad took us out of that extreme poverty and moved us to North Carolina. So in the 11th grade, I hurt my ankle, and I've told the story before, and it took that away from me. And that's where my rage really started in life. I started drug abuse. I had a very severe drug abuse. They called me a polyaddict under the chronic disease model. I was addicted to 3 or more different drug families. I would substitute. I would do whatever I could that day to get fucked up. I didn't want to face the reality that my future was over. The future that I saw out of the little town in North Carolina that we lived. I was very angry. I was very angry at this life. I was very angry at the God that was supposed to have this plan for me. I was enraged already. I was 17 years old, and, you know, I got strung out. And I was never really one that did like hardcore drugs. I did designer drugs and hallucinogenics and, you know, lots of Xanax and a drug called Tylox and a drug called Stadol. And, you know, I got strung out and I committed some crimes. I went to prison. I've talked about this. Many people in this chat know this story, and some of you are hearing it for the first time. And I'm a smart guy. I'm not some person that was supposed to fail in life. I've always been very creative. I started writing stories when I was 5 years old. I've always excelled at sports. I've always been liked by my peers. A natural leader. And for 7 months, 8 months, I sat in a little 16-man jail cell in North Carolina, thinking about how I fucked up my entire life. And I got mad. And one night I really wanted out. I just couldn't take it no more. They kept putting off my trial. And I just wanted to go to prison. I just wanted to get out of that fucking jail cell. And that's the first time that I hurt myself. I was just so mad. And I just started punching the wall. And I punched until I broke my hand. And they took me to the hospital. And I got out of that jail cell for just a moment. About 6-7 hours, I think. Yeah, it was the first time it happened. It happened a lot. But that wasn't enough for me. You see, I had completely destroyed my life. I blamed everyone, myself and everybody around me. I joined a gang. I quickly realized that being a big human being, I could easily hurt other human beings. I enjoyed the pain of a fight. I enjoyed the pain I would inflict on other human beings. You know, prison's a long story, and I'll be going into that in much detail. as I continue on this channel. I got out of prison. I got out of Christianity, and I got out of, I think by the time I left prison, I was well into my Native American spirituality. So I was out of Buddhism and Taoism at that point. And I was angry. I was enraged. You know, punching walls wasn't enough. I mean, because I would destroy walls wherever I lived. I destroyed my hand. I never broke my hand after that first time. I learned my limits, but I needed that release. I needed to get that rage out. I needed to get that pain out. And it wouldn't get out until I'd feel it in my hand, and then I'd start to feel everything else.
Sometimes if you don't, if you're not raised with proper coping techniques, or you don't learn them over the course of your life for whatever reason, sometimes that pain can be that soul comfort.
Well, I watched my dad. My dad was never an abuser, but he was a yeller, and he would get in fights. And when I was real young, he would get in fights with my uncles before he moved to North Carolina. And he was a workaholic. So he was never there. And he took us out of Battle Creek to kind of help us when we were young. But it was too late. I'm going into in-depth detail on that. But for this story, it became a point, like, for the first 2 years after prison, that I was actively trying to go back because I couldn't have a future. I had destroyed it. I had it in my mind that I had destroyed it. And I was just so enraged that sometimes, I couldn't express it to people. I was doing my slam poetry thing at this point, and I was starting to really get the poison out of my soul. But
you're also from an older generation too. Like, I know that sometimes it's uncomfortable to bring that up, but I mean, we're starting to get some more acceptance nowadays for, people assigned male to show these sorts of feelings, but there was significantly less tolerance for that. Be a man, stiff upper lip, all of that. That must have been incredible pressure.
Yeah, and it's how I was raised in North Carolina. You're spot on there, Ali. In North Carolina, it's a different beast. I understand that a lot of southern states are very conservative, but especially where I lived in North Carolina, it was a really, really small town. I mean, you couldn't get much smaller. We called it Mayberry, which there is an actual Mayberry in North Carolina. But you're raised with this very old-fashioned style, and yeah, as a man, you're supposed to be, you're supposed to make what you make in this life. And I had very clear plans of going to college, using sports to go to college, to study my writing, and really pursue that career. And I've spoken about all of that on my channel. I'm very open about my past. This is the part that I never really shared before, was just how violent I was. I've always said I was violent. I just never shared it. That rage, that disgust at myself, it took professional help. I would have never gotten over it if I didn't start to get the therapy, to talk to people, to tell them what was going on in my head, and to just get out there and start working again. Because I didn't even think I could get a job. You hear those old stories, you're a felon now, you're not even going to be able to get a job. And you read the applications, and it says that they're not going to discriminate as long as you tell them. And that's just like, oh yeah, I ain't getting a job. And
it's a very punishment-oriented system rather than being focused on rehabilitation, on reintroduction. They say there's programs, but not for every crime. Yeah, and still, like, you need people to talk to, and my person was always my mom, and it through it all, like, I could speak to her about anything, even though she was deeply indoctrinated into what I would call fundamental Christianity.
She would always listen to me. And when she passed, it became an issue again. And nobody knows that I've started going back to therapy. I haven't felt any urges to punch a wall, but I've just, sometimes you need people to talk to, that know how to listen. And that's the most important thing of all of this, that we need to communicate with each other. We need to find somebody we can communicate and get it out of us. And some people have that, and some people don't. And there's a lot of insecurities involved, and it's so nuanced. And it took me so long to stop hitting those fucking walls.
Well,
But
it can be terrifying to be. It can be terrifying to be vulnerable.
I'm sorry, Allie, what was that?
Oh, I was saying it can be terrifying to be vulnerable too, to open up to someone, to not know how they'll respond. Like that can be absolutely, paralyzing for some people.
Yeah, but I haven't hit a wall in over 10 years. I can't remember exactly. Like, I stopped counting a long time ago, but it was well before my daughter was ever born. And then my daughter was born, and she changed me fundamentally. Like now, my existence is for her. I've taught her love. She's just, she didn't see her dad fighting, like I did. She didn't have a dad that was working all the time like I did. I'm here quite a bit, and, I've just, I've done it differently. And I realized at one point that, your dreams are never over. Your life is never over. There's always, a way through, even if it's shitty for a while. And you just got to keep fighting. You just got to talk to people. And that's my message to everybody, closing this out, and then I'll hand it back to Allie. And it's just talk to people, get it out, because sometimes it's really hard, and it's a big step sometimes, but it's what saved me, was starting to talk to people and getting it out and saying, I don't want to do this to myself anymore. I have problems in my right hand, because that's my strong hand. And, I beat the shit out of a few walls, but I never won those fights. So, that's my message, just talk. And I'm here for people. I tend to be busy, but if it's serious, I'm gonna make time for you. My Twitter account is public. My email is public. I'm on Discord. Reach out to me, and I will make time for you. But with that, I'm gonna hand it back to Allie, and I just want to thank everybody so much.
Well, I'd like to make one more note about your story, and that's that one of the common threads across a lot of our stories was having an artistic or creative or even just a hobby as an outlet. And it sounds like poetry was that for you.
Well, poetry was, and then writing stories was, but here in the last 3 years, it's been, YouTube. I've had a hobby that takes up a lot of my time. I spend a lot of time doing what I do here, and it keeps me busy. It keeps me occupied, and as you all know, my rage has been going away. I've gotten it out, because I've talked to you guys. I've talked to you, and you've listened, and you've been there for me, and I'm just so thankful. I'm just so thankful for it. I'm gonna be quiet because I'm getting a bit emotional.
It's okay, Naka. Like, it's, as I've said to everybody else, even though you're the host, you get it too. Talking about this stuff, I know you've talked about some of it before, but revealing, the depth of what you've done in the past, it can feel a little bit shameful, but it can also feel a little bit liberating. And, that of all the people in the chat and in the Discord or anywhere else, that I believe that people can change. We've talked about like my exes and other things in the past. And it's clear that you have made these positive changes, that you're moving forward, that you're trying to do the best by yourself, and that you're trying to do the best by your daughter, and also by your audience. Like this like live stream itself is evidence of that. You were trying to tackle something that you've struggled with head on in a very Naka fashion, to be honest. Like, what do you do? Like, punch the problem in the face. Well, that's what we've done tonight. We've had all of these people share. We've punched that problem right in the face. And I'm proud of you for having the strength to do that, to reveal these shameful things or at least the things that you've said you felt shameful about in the past, and to go back to those places and to share those things. Like, it's amazing. And especially given how big your platform's getting and some of the larger platforms you've been on, it's a risk to be vulnerable. And I'm grateful that you had me on to moderate, and I'm grateful that you've shared some of these things and more with me. I'm grateful to be your friend, and I'm grateful to have been a part of this.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Ali. You've been absolutely brilliant tonight. And thank you, everybody, for coming on. We will have a after show. It will be heavily moderated. I want it to be like it's been. The chat, you guys have been wonderful. This was, we put a lot of consideration coming into tonight, and I want to thank everybody for their time in doing so. Yeah, and thank you, and we will see you soon.